Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, ich darf Sie alle ganz herzlich begrüßen zu unserem heutigen zweiten Abendvortrag. Ich freue mich sehr, dass ich Ihnen den Referenten Eric Robinson kurz vorstellen darf. Eric Robinson forscht zum Funktionieren politischer Systeme in der Antike, zur Historiographie und Kriegswesen, aber allen voran hat die spezifische Betrachtung der antiken Demokratie seit Beginn seiner Karriere begleitet. Eric Robinson hat nach einem BA an der Yale University 1994 sein PhD an der University of Pennsylvania erfolgreich abgeschlossen. Ab 1999 lehrte er als Associate Professor an der Harvard University. Während seiner Zeit in Harvard erhielt er unter anderem einen Preis für Outstanding Undergraduate Teaching. Laut der Harvard Gazette meinte ein damaliger Student zu Eric Robinsons Kursen, ich zitiere: "If anyone doesn't think ancient history is interesting, Robinson will change that perception in a few minutes." Das Begeistern junger Studierende für unser Fachgebiet ist eine herausragende Eigenschaft von Eric Robinson, von der mittlerweile die Studierenden der Indiana University Bloomington profitieren dürfen, wo er aktuell Professor am Department of History and Department of Classical Studies ist. Begleitet haben seinen Weg zahlreiche Publikationen, die ich nicht alle auflisten werde. Ich greife besonders jene Monographien heraus, in denen er sich mit der Demokratie beschäftigt hat. Bis heute ist die Betrachtung von Demokratie als antike Staatsform oft eng mit Athen verknüpft. Dies nicht zuletzt, weil die Überlieferung zu Athen eine intensive Auseinandersetzung mit antiken Vorstellungen der Demokratie ermöglicht. Der von Eric Robinson 2004 herausgegebene Sammelband Ancient Greek Democracy, Reading and Sources ermöglicht einen breiten Zugang zu den zentralen Quellen und ist ein idealer Einstieg in die Betrachtung der antiken Demokratie Athens und darüber hinaus. Denn Jochen Bleiken meinte einst, dass eine Geschichte der Demokratie außerhalb Athens aufgrund der desolaten Quellenlage wohl kaum je verfasst werde. Aber genau dieser Herausforderung stellte sich Eric Robinson gleich mehrmals und er nahm sich der Aufgabe an, unsere Athen-zentrierte Sicht auf Demokratie als antike Staatsform aufzubrechen. In seinem 1997 erschienenen Buch The First Democracies, Early Popular Government Outside Athens zeigte Eric Robinson, dass Demokratie keine athenische Erfindung der Klassik war. Denn trotz oft sehr schwieriger Quellenlage illustrierte er an mehreren Fallbeispielen überzeugend die Entstehung von demokratischen Organisationsstrukturen in griechischen Poleis im 6. Jahrhundert. Die Entstehung der Demokratie ist somit ein schrittweiser Prozess, der in der Archaik und auch außerhalb Athen seinen Anfang nahm. 2011 erschien seine Monographie Democracy Beyond Athens, Popular Government in the Greek Classical Age. Wie der Titel schon vermuten lässt, befasst sich Eric Robinson darin mit der Ausgestaltung und Verbreitung von Demokratie in klassischer Zeit. Aufbauend auf einer minutiösen Quellenstudie diskutiert Eric Robinson 54 Poleis, die demokratische Strukturen in unterschiedlicher Ausprägung aufweisen. Er widerlegt damit deutlich das uns von Thukydides überlieferte Bild, dass die athenische Verfassung allein Vorbild für alle griechischen Demokratien gewesen sei. Athen wird dabei keineswegs seine Wichtigkeit abgesprochen, aber Eric Robinson formuliert abschließend, dass die Geschichte einer Polis nicht die Geschichte einer Verfassungsform sein dürfe. Mit seinem Blick über Athen hinaus, den er auch in weiteren Publikationen verfolgte, hat Eric Robinson somit die antike Demokratieforschung bereichert und maßgeblich vorangebracht. Heute wird er den Blick noch etwas mehr ausweiten. Er wird Demokratie nicht nur in der Antike, sondern auch in der Gegenwart betrachten. Dabei verbindet er seine große Kenntnis der antiken Demokratie mit seiner Kenntnis der Demokratie, in der er selbst lebt. Dear Eric, it is a pleasure to have you here with us in Zurich. We are very excited now to hear your paper on Populism, Ancient and Modern of Government, Demagoguery and Donald Trump.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful event. I'm honored to be here. And I'm not going to abuse that honor by talking over long after a long day of rich presentations in a very warm room. I'll be going less than 40 minutes. So I also want to thank my fellow speakers for their many excellent talks, both yesterday and today. I've learned so much about ancient populism, and this morning, modern populism as well, in particular settings. And there's still more good stuff to come tomorrow, I'm sure. For better or worse, my presentation will be painting with a broader brush than most of you guys have been doing, offering reflections on ancient and modern populists and democracy that I hope at least proves thought-provoking or entertaining, either one. Indeed, in many cases, I'll be covering ground that others have already covered in more detail. Everyone's talked about, well, most people have talked about Trump a little bit. Some of you have talked in great detail about Thucydides or Aristophanes, which I also use more briefly in my comparisons. I look forward to the discussion afterwards so you can point out how wrong I am about everything. Unlike the politician I invoke in my title, I am willing to admit the possibility that I sometimes might be wrong. You should all have a handout. It's a sad little thing. It just lists a few works that may come up in the discussion, in my talk or in the discussion afterwards. I should say that I refer occasionally in the talk to news organizations or websites, fact-checking websites and such. I didn't bother putting all the URLs down. It's kind of useless to put a URL on a piece of paper. But if anyone is actually interested in seeing some of the references to sources of information, this is mostly about Trump, please email me. I'll send you a copy of the paper, and it'll have all the footnotes with all the URLs, and you can sort of quickly check it out. So, in a public forum in 2016, several months before the American presidential election, in which Donald Trump unexpectedly prevailed, I argued that Trump resembled a classic demagogue dressed up in modern clothes. His opponent in 2016, Hillary Clinton, despite her unusual rise to political prominence as a first lady, was a traditional kind of political candidate. She was favored by her party establishment, a centrist for a Democrat and most of her views, knowledgeable about policy. But as I noted at the time, no one would accuse Clinton of being able to set a room on fire with her oratory. She sounded like a politician, kind of a boring one. And that's generally not a good thing in American politics. Trump, on the other hand, was anything but boring and traditional. He was a performer and a self-promoter first, a politician distant second, and a major norm breaker on the American political scene. His parallels with the ancient Athenian demagogue Cleon struck me at the time. Like Cleon, he shattered customs of political conduct and appealed to the least educated and least sophisticated among the voters. The violent populism of his rhetoric, the large and riled-up crowds he attracted, his angry demands that protesters be forcibly removed from his rallies, the insults and personal accusations for political rivals, and indeed for anyone who dared to say a word against him, all recalled, for me, the title Thucydides gave to Cleon, the Iotatos, most violent, and maybe most forceful among the demos. But he was also, of course, most persuasive, the Phenotatos, with the crowd of ordinary people, the demos, and that's Thucydides 536. After Trump's election, many observers of American politics supposed that the weight of the myriad responsibilities he now carried and the dignity of the office of the presidency would calm his public persona and move him closer to the mainstream of American political behavior. They couldn't have been more wrong. What everyone thinks of President Trump's policies, his disdain for conventional, courteous behavior in a president is clear to all. Indeed, it would be hard to find a more indecorous US president in living memory. The early morning tirades on Twitter, the continuous stream of nasty epithets for political opponents, or any public figure he doesn't like, including the recently deceased, witnesses giving sworn testimony, families of fallen soldiers, even children, the hyperbolic declarations of his own greatness, and the sinister motives of his perceived foes all continue and grow less restrained over time, not more. Indeed, the Trump presidency, even more than the Trump candidacy, remind me of the Cleon who so outraged Thucydides and other respectable Athenians of the time. Now, it would be possible to liken Trump to other demagogic politicians of the ancient world, for there were plenty of Greek and Roman leaders who at one time or another played to populist themes as a way to promote their own power and agenda. A number of you have already commented fruitfully on the phenomenon. We've heard a lot about Cleon already. I was happy to see Athenagoras made it in to discussion today. We've talked about Alcibiades a little bit. We could have also bring in folks like Hyperbolus or the unnamed demagogues who perpetrated the Scutalismos at Argos, Romans like Gracchi or Clodius. But I'm going to stick with Cleon. Between Thucydides, Aristophanes, and Plutarch, we know quite a bit about Cleon, even if via sources biased against him. And the many similarities, and even more, the differences between him and Trump, will help me illuminate some general issues of populism in ancient and modern democratic government. And again, these issues are not things that haven't come up already, but I'll put them together in a way that you can like or dislike as you wish. So why do I say Trump reminds me of Cleon even more now, after he's been president for 3 years? Obviously, it has nothing to do with similarities of office. Cleon was a rhetor who allegedly rejected his upper-class connections to develop his populist image. So Connor has argued with Rhodes, and Christian has discussed this today already. The better to give more convincing, fiery speeches that might sway decisions of his city-state's popular assembly. It's true he served at least 2 one-year terms as a strategos or general, leading Athenian military expeditions, but this is hardly the same as being a president of the United States, the 4 to 8 year chief executive of the massive governmental apparatus of a continent-spanning modern nation. But if their duties and many of the issues they confront as politicians necessarily differ, their approaches to them nevertheless show kinship. Arguably, the most striking commonality is the harshness, the meanness of their words and policies. I've already referenced Trump's many venomous attacks through Twitter and in speeches at his rallies, the sort of thing observers had hoped he would leave behind after assuming the office of president. He has not. His vitriol well matches Cleon's vituperative and self-promoting attacks on opposing politicians of his day. But the hostile approach the two share goes well beyond personal attacks on perceived foes. Cleon is famous for his recommendation of death for all Mytilenean men during the Athenian debate following the defeat of the Mytilenean rebellion. Other voices argued for mercy, or at least a more selective punishment for the surrendered enemy, executing perhaps a couple thousand of the prime movers, rather than every last Mytilenean man. But Cleon, in the name of justice, vengeance, and deterrence of other would-be rebels in an Athenian empire he bluntly described as a tyranny, argued that the Athenians should kill them all, turning what should have been a deliberative speech suited to the assembly into a prosecutorial one, as Harris has pointed out, and a murderous one at that. Cleon also showed a characteristic harshness in likely originating or backing the sudden sharp rise in tribute payments demanded of Athenian allies late in the year 425, together with tough provisions for its execution. That's IG 1Q 71. In a similar vein, Trump, of course, has incessantly demanded that the US's NATO allies pay more for everything, from NATO's expenses to assisting Ukraine to national defense budgets. He has repeatedly demanded that his generals find a way to make money out of US deployments overseas. This has been reported in a few places. The Rucker book, A Very Stable Genius, which is on your handout, details a number of occasions where Trump has seem to show absolutely no knowledge of, or interest in why the U.S. has forces deployed around the world, and insists that what we should do is try to make money off of that. What will that? He has raised tariffs on goods imported to the U.S., sparking trade wars as a result. Happily, Trump has not been in a position to speak to the execution of thousands, as did Cleon with the Middle-Eneans, but his mean-spirited, tough guy act does not make one optimistic about where he would land on the rhetorical spectrum of mercy versus vengeance. Meanwhile, he has pursued calculatedly cruel immigration policies to deter immigrants coming to the United States. His decision to separate children from their parents on the border with Mexico resulted in the extended incarceration of at least 3,000 children, including infants, in metal cages. And he has sought to aggressively deport non-citizens already in the US, regardless of whether they pose any threat, even those receiving life-saving care for rare diseases in US hospitals. And within the past year, he and his Justice Department under William Barr announced the return of the death penalty in the US federal criminal cases, a type of punishment that had been discontinued years ago due to court challenges over the drugs used in the executions, which had been deemed cruel and unusual. Apparently for tough guy Trump, cruel and unusual sounds just right. Beyond the harsh policies, another subtler thread joins the ancient and modern populists, Cleon and President Trump. And that is their tendency to take credit for others' successes while complaining about conspiracies supposedly working against them. Aristophanes and the Knights, as his Cleon stand-in Paphlagon, boast endlessly about his success at Pylos, and yet be the butt of a joke to the effect that he stole the rightful glory from another general. Thucydides' account of events at Pylos and Sphacteria Island, with the relative contributions of Demosthenes and Cleon, largely confirms the truth of this jab. And in the opening portion of Cleon's speech on the need to kill all the Middle-Eneans, Cleon essentially accuses his opponents of having been bribed by the Middle-Eneans to speak against the decision the Athenians made the previous day to execute the Middle-Eneans, as Rosalind agrees. And that's at Thucydides 338. In the case of Trump, one doesn't know where to start when it comes to conspiracy mongering and false credit taking. Right from the beginning of his presidency, before he had enacted any meaningful economic policies, he took credit for a strong US economy, still picking up steam from the recovery that began in the Obama era. Yet ever since, whether it's the receding threat from ISIS, to falling gasoline prices, to environmental progress, to lower numbers of cancer deaths, I kid you not, lower numbers of cancer deaths in his first year as president. Trump has crowed self-congratulations about trends to which his administrative policies have contributed little or nothing. Meanwhile, he promotes baseless conspiracy theories when he thinks they make up for some embarrassment of his or will stain an opponent. So, global warming is a hoax, one perpetrated by the Chinese. Some of you have probably heard that one. That's not a little unfair for me to raise because that's what didn't come during his presidency. That was something he publicized in 2012. He has stopped calling climate change a hoax, but he still doesn't believe in acting on climate change except to roll back Obama-era attempts to deal with it. Here's another one. He lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election because of millions of fake votes being counted. He managed to get a national commission appointed, headed by a crony of his, to look into this one. And after months of doing I don't know what, it found nothing. If there was anything to find, it would have found it. Found nothing. And of course, Ukraine, not Russia, interfered in the US presidential election of 2016 in collusion with the Democratic National Committee. This last falsehood originated with Russia's intelligence services, but Trump doesn't care. He still pushed this idea even during his impeachment. Never mind that his related actions are what got him impeached in the first place. Now, many politicians stretch the truth from time to time, but Trump's mania for spreading elaborate falsehoods designed to help his cause breaks new ground for an American chief executive. Says presidential historian Douglas Brinkley, quote, "We've never had a president who trades in conspiracy theories, who prefers lies instead of fact." To this point, we've been considering parallel behaviors of demagogues Cleon and Trump. Let's pause to consider the other side of the coin, reactions they have engendered. Here too, the parallels mark them as populist analogs. Both have inspired intensely loyal support from the common people in their respective political bodies, and have done so not only because of populist policies, but due to their lowbrow, unconventional speaking styles. Cleon outraged the respectable with his antics on stage, hitching up his clothes, shouting, or running around when speaking. Aristotle's Constitution of Athenians 28.3 is good on this, and Plutarch's Nicias 8. All of which seems only to have endeared him to ordinary Athenians. Trump's antics are not the same. He doesn't flip his clothes, his massively elongated tie around, or moving his clothing is not Trump's thing. But he too sounds very unlike a normal, sophisticated politician when he gives a speech. Jennifer Sclafani, a linguist at Georgetown University, says, "Linguistically, he speaks like everyone else, and we're not used to hearing that from a president." Whether it's his constant use of colloquialisms like huge, bigly, believe me, and loser, or it's his crude facial expressions, or even his physical imitations of people. He behaves on stage unlike any president ever has. And for whatever reason, a certain slice of the country can't get enough of him. Polls suggest that while for his whole presidency, he has been one of the least popular presidents ever among citizens overall, within his own Republican Party, he has sky-high approval ratings, and he does particularly well among the less educated and poorer white people. And just as Trump and Cleon do and did well with common people, both have attracted the sneers of elites. With Cleon, we know this not just because of the fact that literary types like Aristophanes and Thucydides and Plutarch all despised him, but the way he was despised. Thucydides writes revealingly about this when describing the reaction to Cleon's outrageous boast during an assembly meeting that he would quickly and easily defeat the Spartans on Sphacteria Island. Some Athenians laughed, Thucydides says, and the sophron, the reasonable, reflected that maybe it was a good thing Cleon was going to get his chance, because the fool might just go get himself killed. Ha ha ha. That's Thucydides 4:28. Of course, it didn't turn out that way, and Cleon's smashing success meant years of unassailable popularity with the mass of Athenians. Trump, meanwhile, has inspired a constant fusillade of scorn, not just from Democrats, but from old guard Republicans, from academics, and observers in the media at large. As we've heard today, late-night comedy shows regularly pillory him, and the cognoscenti were especially tickled when reports and even videos surfaced of foreign leaders making fun of Trump. None of it changes a thing when it comes to Trump's base of support. I could go on about the parallels, but there's no need. Trump, I hope I have shown, is, mutatis mutandis, following Cleon's playbook in many respects. But there are also differences. Differences between the two that go beyond the obvious superficial ones. The first difference points up a crucial way the democratic government has changed over the millennia in ways that both help protect against the excesses of demagoguery and that indicates the special danger Trump represents in the American political context. Meanwhile, another difference suggests one way that we should all be grateful, sincerely grateful, that Trump is no Cleon. The first difference involves the institutions of democracy. As far as we know, for all his norm-breaking rhetorical style and violent temperament, Cleon did not attempt to tear down central institutions of the Athenian democracy. We don't hear of attacks on councils, as for example Ephialtes engaged in with the Areopagus, or the rules of office holding, as the Gracchi did with tribunes at Rome, or other such entities at Athens. For that matter, we don't hear that Cleon meant to overthrow the democracy or rise to tyranny, Pedestrian corruption, such as bribery or embezzlement, sure. Aristophanes' Knights is full of such charges, together with shameful flattery of Demos, but not the desire to slay Demos or supplant him. As far as the admittedly limited evidence shows us, Cleon directed his vitriol at specific political enemies or conspiracies rather than neutral bodies. Things are different with Donald Trump. One of the real peculiarities of the Trump presidency has been his continued embrace of the role of outsider and chief whiner, even as he leads the US government. It's not just individuals who attract his ire. Any institution that does not produce the result that Trump wants gets fiercely criticized. And the pose is always as an outsider, who's just sort of watching what's going on. He's president. He could take action if he actually meant the criticism that but this is the pose that he has always had as a candidate and now as president. He has maintained it. Under Trump, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, one of the most respected nonpartisan organizations in the US government, has come under withering attack for all manner of perceived shortcomings, generally involving its investigations of manifestly corrupt Trump allies or its failure to prosecute his political enemies. It goes beyond angry tweets and speeches. Directors have been fired and replaced. Senior officers have been hounded into retirement, demoted, or reassigned. The point seems to be to cast doubt in the minds of Americans about the trustworthiness of the FBI, so that when the latest investigative bombshell comes out about, say, Trump's corrupt national security advisor, or campaign manager, or assistant campaign manager, or a longtime political advisor, or fixer attorney, all of whom have been indicted and successfully prosecuted for blatant criminal wrongdoing, people listening to Trump will think, the FBI? Pfft, the fix is in. They're just out to get my man Trump. This strategy of institutional vilification has been applied to other government bodies as well. At various times, the Justice Department, the CIA, the State Department, and the entire federal court system have all felt Trump's verbal lash. It's an incredibly toxic strategy, one sure to grind down morale within the targeted organizations, while weakening Americans' already shaky confidence in their government. Some have even accused Trump of doing all this at the behest of Russia, because of Trump's oddly warm relationship with Putin, and because it so perfectly accords with Russia's long-term strategy of undermining Western democracies by stoking distrust, internal bickering, and false narratives. I will not endorse this accusation. I don't think I really believe it. And in any case, I don't want to supplement Trump's conspiracy theories with one of my own. I think Trump's behavior is perfectly explicable in terms of his own venality and political self-absorption. Consequences be damned. But I haven't mentioned Trump's most damaging line of institutional attack, and that's on the American national news media. No one organization is the focus of his ire here, but all of them, except, most of the time, Republican-leaning Fox News, though we've gotten on their case a lot more in the last 6 months or so, whenever they release a poll. They have no control over the results of the poll, but it looks bad for Trump and Fox News is going downhill, he says. From the beginning of his presidency, he has lambasted reputable national news organizations such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, major television networks as fake news and the fake news media. Anytime a major story about Trump appears that he doesn't like, he lashes out about the fake news media. And in the last 2 years, Trump has taken his media attacks in an even darker direction, repeatedly calling the media the enemy of the people, a phrase laden with sinister connotations as used by authoritarian rulers of the past. Threats and even violence against journalists have noticeably increased in the United States as the president has ramped up his attacks. While all presidents have felt the heat of negative reporting and complained about it, President Obama got into a famous tiff with Fox News, for example. None have come close to producing the steady stream of vituperations spewed by Trump. According to the Nonpartisan Committee to Protect Journalists, Trump has sent, quote, 1,339 tweets about the media that were critical, insinuating, condemning, or threatening, quote, and has increased the frequency and severity of his attacks in the course of his presidency. One suspects that Trump's ultimate aim with this incessant barrage is akin to that of his attacks on the FBI and other governmental agencies. Sow distrust, in order that people, especially Trump's followers, will dismiss out of hand any unflattering news that emerges from his targets. By doing so, he inoculates himself from the repercussions of his many scandals. And it has worked appallingly well. Whether it's the indictment and conviction or confession of so many senior Trump associates, or the Trump campaign's eager use of illegally obtained Russian information in 2016, or Trump's payoffs to porn stars he's had affairs with, or his exploiting of the presidency to enrich his companies, or his coercion of a foreign state to investigate a political rival, any one of which might have doomed previous presidents, Trump skates on by, with his supporters utterly unfazed, in part because they have been trained not to trust anything reported in the national media. It's all just fake news coming from the enemy of the people. Now, some might say Trump hasn't always skated by. He just got impeached for one of those scandals. Impeached, but not convicted. Thanks to rock-solid support from congressional Republicans, encouraged to stay in line by Trump's sky-high approval ratings among Republican voters, who tend to ignore all the major news outlets except Fox News, Trump has skated by this time as well. In making all these institutional attacks, Trump is doing something Cleon could not have done, even if he wanted to. Democratic government in the 20th and 21st centuries has relied on large institutions in a way that ancient popular governments never did. I'm sure I don't need to point out to anybody here the massive bureaucracy that underpins modern national governments and its absence in ancient Athens or other Greek democracies. This has come up today already. There was no real analog to the FBI, CIA, Justice Department, or the US Federal Appeals Courts, so often attacked by Trump, not to mention all the other agencies of the American government or other prosperous modern democracies. At Athens, panels of citizens serving one-year terms, or temporary juries, or the Council of 500, or elected generals, carried out greatly simplified versions of the tasks these vast bodies performed. Or more often, the tasks simply didn't exist. Even more so regarding the news media. There were no newspapers or magazines or television channels or wire services. Politicians talked to the people directly in assembly meetings or on occasion in jury courts or council meetings. Written decrees or other notices might be posted occasionally. Word of mouth did the rest. The existence of large modern institutions like the media, government agencies, and the judicial system changes the relationship between government leaders and citizens. They create distance, as we've just heard, and provide filters. In a large modern nation state, they may be necessary to provide expected services, but populist politicians will often find them frustrating. A demagogue's power comes through direct appeal to the voters. For all the indignity and childishness of Trump's Twitter habit, it is a crucial means of granting him unfiltered communication to his followers, whenever he wants. News organizations filter things. They choose what's news, what's important, and give us context. A demagogue like Trump doesn't want any of that. He wants to tell you what's news and what's important. Twitter lets him do just that. So in a perverse way, it makes complete sense that Trump has spent so much energy undermining faith in the media. Similarly, with government agencies, although Trump is nominally the head of all of them, he cannot possibly control everything going on in them. Bureaucracies are too large and mostly staffed, thankfully, with professionals rather than political appointees. Thus, since Trump can't control them, he will target for denigration the ones producing results not to his liking. Looking at it from the other direction, if you wanted to set up a government that, while democratic in spirit, nevertheless constrains the ability of populist politicians to appeal directly to the voters and to deliver goods to them at will, you would set up large professionally staffed institutions of government and further establish a vast and heterodox news media as go-betweens separating presidents from voters. Cleon would hate working in an environment like this. I think he'd have a Twitter handle too, probably something like @RealCleon. Now, many have seen in Trump a grave threat to American democracy itself. He is the harbinger of American democratic weakness being exposed, revealing its doom, argues Sean Rosenberg in his paper Democracy Devouring Itself, the rise of the incompetent citizen and the appeal of right-wing populism. Or, according to Levitsky and Ziblatt in their book How Democracies Die, Trump is following in the footsteps of authoritarians who slowly degrade democracy's safeguards until there is no resistance left to dictatorial rule. The most intriguing analysis I have seen of this kind comes from Roman historian Edward Watts in his book Moral Republic. Watts retells the tale of the destruction of the Roman Republic, a tale we are all familiar with here, but he does so in a way that makes crystal clear the lessons for modern Americans under Trump. Institutions don't erode themselves. The long-term danger comes from attacks upon them by the ambitious, together with the failure of citizens or their representatives to punish them for it. Watts sees the Gracchi, whose norm-breaking and populist threats provoked political violence, as setting a terrible precedent for a republic that would soon descend into chaos and authoritarian rule. In truth, I remain a bit more optimistic than Watts and the others seem to be. Despite the recent acquittal of Trump in his impeachment trial, a golden opportunity for representatives to check or punish an institution eroder if there ever was one, I don't see the looming fall of American democracy. Not successfully using the rarely invoked power of impeachment to end Trump's presidency may have been the most prudent, if cowardly and unjust, course given the deep divisions in the country and the size and passion of Trump's popular support. Some Republican senators have actually voiced this in looking for any cover they can to explain their vote to acquit in the face of overwhelming evidence of the president's guilt. They've said that amid many accusations of improper procedure by the Democrats, etc., that removing the president would be, in this divided, polarized environment, would be actually dangerous for the country. And they may have a point. Of course, that sort of bleeds into their argument that it's reversing the election. It's not doing that. The impeachment is in the Constitution for a reason, and it doesn't have to do with reversing elections. Better for the long term, I would judge, for Trump to remain in office for now and be turned out in the next election, which current polling suggests could well happen, despite the advantages incumbents have in American elections. The violent precedents Watts sees in Roman history will be avoided if Americans simply reject Trump at the polls. Doing so will also prevent the creeping authoritarianism Levitsky and Ziblatt fear from coming to pass. You will have to wait until November and see. My fingers are crossed. Finally, I'll close with the last revealing difference between Trump and Cleon that I want to talk about. And it's something that inspires in me a powerful sense of relief. Cleon consistently voiced the need for Athenian aggression. He fought off peace negotiations with Sparta when it was clear Sparta was ready to make a deal that was very good for Athens. He relentlessly pushed the Athenians into offensive operations against the Spartans, far more aggressive ones than they had contemplated under Pericles, hoping to strike a punishing blow when they were down rather than try to achieve a lasting settlement. He personally led some military campaigns and supported others, bringing on battles at Sphacteria, Megara, Delium, Torone, and Amphipolis. His death at the Battle of Amphipolis made possible the negotiations that resulted in the Peace of Nikias. Trump is different. He is anything but a warmonger. During the presidential campaign, he repeatedly criticized President George W. Bush for starting the war with Saddam Hussein's Iraq and its non-existent weapons of mass destruction. Since becoming president, Trump has happily rattled his saber and talked tough, or what he thinks is tough. He usually sounds more like a petulant toddler. But so far, he has avoided getting the US involved in any new wars. More than that, he has unilaterally and on a whim withdrawn US special forces from Syria, thereby abandoning allies and upsetting the balance of power in the region, but getting the US out. He has abased himself to the tyrant Kim Jong-un, hoping to make a peace deal with North Korea. He has cozied up to Putin and pressured the leader of Ukraine to patch up his differences with Moscow. One can question the wisdom of all these policies, but the common thread is the desire to withdraw US soldiers from conflict zones, make peace, and avoid war. The most militarily belligerent thing Trump has done as president came recently, when he launched the drone strike that killed Iran's Qasem Soleimani in Iraq. While certainly provocative and quite possibly illegal, this amounted to an assassination rather than an act of war. And Trump's failure to respond at all when Iran reacted with rocket attacks from Iran onto US forces stationed in Iraq meant that tensions dissipated, and the war everyone feared would break out never did. Imagine for a moment what a Cleon at the helm of America's vast military machine could do. None of the modern institutions that create filters and buffers between populist leaders and the people do anything to stop a US commander-in-chief from making use of the US military, as long as he can pretend some kind of emergency exists. Of course, in the Constitution, it's supposed to be Congress that has the right to declare war, but over the last half century or so, the custom has been for Congress to say little or nothing as long as presidents can allege that there's some emergency that requires him as commander-in-chief to use military force. And the Congress under Trump has shown no inclination to change that idea. So Cleon would have a free hand. Even without recourse to the US's stockpile of nuclear weaponry, North Korea and Iran could well be smoking holes in the ground right now. Hundreds of thousands of people would be dead. An even more catastrophic war with a long-standing rival like Russia and China would be a real possibility. Again, I do not say this to endorse Trump's actual foreign policy, which has been erratic at best and very unsettling to US allies around the globe. But if Trump shared fellow demagogue Cleon's preference for military aggression, the foreign policy missteps we have seen over the last 3 years would seem like blessings. Thank goodness for small favors, I suppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I'm sure there are a lot of questions.
I stunned everybody to silence.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. With respect to differences, there's one thing that you didn't mention, and that is that Trump's election campaign in 2016 had information that was based on research by Cambridge Analytica, and Cambridge Analytica doesn't exist anymore, but similar things are still...
Its spirit lives on.
Exactly. So how does that fit into your picture, and would it make you a little less optimistic with respect to the outcome of the election in November?
Yes. So I guess 2 points in response. Optimistic, I don't know. I am worried with many Americans that the acquittal of Trump is only going to embolden him to pull dirty tricks, to fix things as best he can for 20. He won't be able to fix the election in 2020, but do the same sorts of tricks that helped him in 2016. But about the difference with Cleon, it is true that we don't hear, we're very ill-informed about Cleon's election to the generalship. We don't hear about a scandal that he was, elected with illegal help. But I guess you could say there is this parallel. The political breakthrough for Cleon, what really set him on a path to dominance in Athenian politics for a period of years, was this very irregular way he got a military command in the first place. And it was in the episode I referenced in my talk in 425 with the assembly meeting at which he was actually bitching and moaning about the Athenian generals on the scene. They're doing a terrible job. And Thucydides describes this moment where Nicias turns the tables on him and says, well, you go ahead and take care of it, Cleon. And at first, this is according to Thucydides. I'm not sure how much Thucydides is cooking this to make Cleon look particularly bad. But in any case, apparently Cleon first says, well, no, I'm not your general, not me. But then eventually, he aggressively accepts the responsibility. And this is very irregular. This is not, and he takes control of the Athenian forces on scene, despite not being an elected general, and he wins a spectacular victory. So it's not the same thing. He didn't cheat in an election, but he attained power in a very irregular way. He used it to brilliant advantage, thanks to Demosthenes. Again, this is Thucydides, but according to Thucydides, thanks very much to Demosthenes. And then he parlayed that success to political dominance in Athens for years to come. I don't know, my optimism is a very guarded one. And I was actually more optimistic about a year ago about Trump's prospects. I thought that given the polls where they were, it was really unlikely Trump was going to win re-election. But in the last year, I've gotten more worried. And Trump's polls are actually up after the impeachment, which I'm hoping they'll go down again. I don't know. I do think there's a very good chance that he'll be turned out of office. Maybe a better than 50-50 chance, but it's very close. So I don't know. I don't know if optimistic is the word to use.
Thank you very much for this talk. It is indeed very tempting to go into the issue of present-day politics because that is so, we're facing what is possibly going to happen and what is already happening. One of the things that make me worried about, indeed against the optimistic feeling about the re-election, is whether actually two things. One is that amongst the Republicans, there is so little opposition against him. Because even Mitt Romney was really the only one who took the courage and did something about the traditional Republican, say, principle of upholding the Constitution. You don't hear anything anymore about it. And so I think the potential opposition within the Republicans Party seems to have kind of petered out. On the other hand, and also comparing the situation with recent elections in Great Britain, is the problem of a divided opposition, which is, we look on the one hand at the success of one particular leader, which you think, how can anyone vote for someone so crazy? But it is also, is there an alternative that is strong enough to pull off a successful campaign against this person? So, question mark.
So I think it looks worse now than it will in several months after the end of the Democratic primaries, and the Democrats have picked someone to be their presidential candidate. Right now, it's just a total mess. It's been a complete mess on the Democratic side for many months, with a record number of people running, and it must be a near record number of candidates still considered viable after the first couple of primaries. It's crazy, but there's a healthy or optimistic reason for that. there are so many Democratic candidates running because among people who understand American electoral politics, there has been a very strong sense that this is a golden opportunity for the Democrats to defeat a Republican. It's the same thing that happened when Trump won in 2016. It was a record Republican field then. Republicans felt that for a variety of reasons, some of them systemic, not having to do particularly with Obama or Clinton or whatever, that the Republicans had a golden opportunity. So a gazillion Republicans ran, and guess what? Even though they nominated this crazy candidate Trump, improbable candidate Trump, they nevertheless won. And so I think it looks bad now. It looks like the Democrats are never going to unite around someone, but it's actually there's an optimistic reason for that, because the political professionals who know what they're doing all thought this is a golden opportunity for the Democrats to win. I don't know whether this supports or detracts from your point. Trump actually has opposition. William Weld won, I think, 8% of the vote in the New Hampshire primary against Trump's 92, or maybe there was a. There is someone running against him, but the abysmal level of support that Weld got actually matches the approval ratings for Trump in Republican polls, so it's actually no news whatsoever. The only news, I suppose, is that he's still sticking it out. I think he's probably hoping to catch lightning in a bottle. Some bizarre, scandal will happen. But scandal. Trump is immune to scandal. I think he must be hoping for a heart attack. I think that's what he's hoping. Then it's him against Pence, and then maybe. But I don't know.
Many thanks, and of course we all keep our fingers crossed that your optimism may be well-founded and so on. But still, I mean, 2 or 3 observations, because also that he is not a warmonger. In a way it's true, but on the other hand, we have never heard a president of the United States using words like he did regarding North Korea before his love affair. I mean, that he will destroy 45 million and so on. It's really, I think we cannot trust this approach of his, which was part of his campaign, too much, because he did the same then with Afghanistan, and he's the toddler who uses his toys and who is happy to use them if it serves his own ambition and his own things. And therefore, I would be rather, unfortunately, negative about this thing. But it's not the major point. But the major point is, do you think that there is a breaking point in this sort of institutional framework when it might really go in the direction of fascism? This is to me the big question, because I mean he is vilifying all the institutions, as you said, and you showed it in a very impressive way. And he has put, as I said also in my paper before, in every agency, national public agency, he has put someone who is against the aims of these agencies. He wants to destroy everything in a way, or at least to reformulate it and to rebuild it according to his background people and so on. And therefore, I really think there is an enormous strain on the institutions now. The last things with Barr and so on, it's really, one has the impression sometimes the tipping point is there already. But what is your sort of evaluation as an insider?
Right. Well, thank God. I did work for a U.S. congressman for a while before I became an academic. But I was just scuttling along the corridors of power. I had no power influence. So thank goodness I'm not involved at all now. So I guess your minor point. Trump has used just egregious terms when dealing with issues of foreign policy, violent, belligerent ones, inarticulate as always. I can't even remember the tweet about North Korea that was something about they will face destruction, world power destruction, bigger than you could imagine big. I mean, that's not a direct quote, but it's just as bad as that.
Fire and fury.
Fire and fury, like you never know, or something like you wouldn't believe. That's one of his favorites. I mean, it's comical, but it's dangerous. It's dangerous to say something like things like this. I mean, so I'm not, declaring a victory lap, and no bad things can happen. But this is just typical for him in all realms, foreign policy, domestic policy, everything. This is just over-the-top language, and there doesn't seem to be an intent behind it to do anything concrete, to stir up military trouble. And about doing it for his benefit, I mean, the golden opportunity, I don't know how it was received in Europe, but in the United States, when he assassinated Soleimani, there was a lot of panic that this was the moment. Let's see, he's about to be impeached. He's in the process of impeachment. What would you like to do to distract attention from that and rally the country around you, start a war? It's classic. And I know it's classic, not just because it's classic, but Trump tells me it's classic. Because Trump was accusing Obama of being about to do that. And so Trump knows this trick. He absolutely knows this trick, and he knows that it works. And what happens after he had the golden opportunity to escalate the war with Iran? Totally backs up. When they send a missile attack on the U.S. base, and there apparently no U.S. soldiers died, but there were some injuries. He downplayed the injuries. They got some headaches. It's nothing, which is insulting to the military and whatever. But the point is, that was the opportunity. If he wanted to just, in complete cynical disregard of the national interest, support his own political interest at the moment instead, and use foreign policy to do it, that was the moment, and he did it. So I have fair confidence that it's not his intention up to this point to start an actual war. But that's not to say that in his chaotic foreign policy, he might get something wrong. Sorry, the second actually important part of your question was what?
Well, you see that there could be a breaking point in the tenure of the institution.
Yes. So I don't think it's happened, and obviously I don't think it's happened yet. And I don't even think it's that close. If you look at the chart, Levitsky and Zablat has a sort of a chart of things that can go wrong, and against other sort of populist would-be dictators. And Trump has ticked off just the first level of several, and no more than that. In terms of, I forget what their scale is. I actually have no fears that he is about to install a fascist regime or a totalitarian regime anytime soon, or that that's his goal. But I have to say, if he wins re-election, and there's another 4 years, and he has 4 more years to downgrade the institutions, that really, it becomes a realistic fear. That's when I'm going to start actually getting worried about it. Right now, if he gets turned out, I think he's done long-term damage to American political discourse. But I don't think he has, I don't think the democracy itself is about to go away. But 4 more years of putting the people he wants in charge of agencies. I mean, what he's done to the Justice Department with William Barr is probably, it's arguably the most damaging thing in taking what had been a politically independent agency and turning it into an arm of his own political benefit. Though I will say, for some reason, I don't quite understand why, Wray, the FBI director, is still the FBI director. He is no Trumpian. And maybe he feels like he took such heat for getting rid of Comey that throwing out another FBI director would look bad. But is he really concerned about looking bad these days? I think he still is, actually. Trump is always concerned about how he looks and how he's portrayed even in the fake news media.
What I'm interested in, where would you see the reasons for the different foreign policy of both? Both come from Thiel and Trump come from a commercial background, but Thiel is the more aggressive war politician. Is the reason, let's say, the more aristocratic, militarily driven spirit of Athenian democracy during the 5th century? Is there, let's say, a different social basis of populism in both societies?
Those are intriguing ideas. But I have to say, first of all, to destroy my own argument, the Athenians were at war at the time. America is not at war when Trump came to office. So you could say, Robinson, you're a fool. The real issue is that the Athenians were at war. And, but even so, Cleon clearly had a much more aggressive policy, and his opportunity to make peace and his positive efforts to sabotage any sort of peace is why I made the point that I did. I actually think that it probably doesn't have anything to do with their different backgrounds or their shared background. I really do think that Trump is a money guy. And well, actually, he's first a popularity and image guy, but he's also a money guy. And so he's transferred that to United States policy. He has not been prosecuted, as he probably will soon be, for all sorts of financial crimes, if he's not pardoned after his term as president. He's never, attacked people except women sexually. He's never tried to kill people. He's never, put out hits on people. Violence has not been, except sexual violence, which we shouldn't forget, has not been part of his MO. I believe the news reports that suggest that in terms of foreign policy, he's all about American swagger, but he's not about conquering territory. And this I hope makes my point. The only time we heard of Trump trying to seize territory is his desire to buy Greenland. Okay? He wanted to buy it. He wanted to buy it. There was no threat of U.S. military forces coming in. Like it could have been defended if he wanted it. But no, he wanted to buy it. He wanted to swing a deal, and so I think that's sort of he's calling him a businessman is an exaggeration. He's run a family business badly. Is after a huge head start from his father, but he likes to think of himself as a businessman and a builder of great things and a super rich guy. And I think he's transferred that to the country. I think that's what he's trying to do for the country. I don't think it really has anything to do with more than that. Though I like your theories.
A few others first.
Well, I should like to come in with a small comment on this discussion. Is that possible?
Okay.
I'm wondering whether it has less to do with the figure. Although I think your portrait of Trump as a money guy rather than a war guy is absolutely true, but it must also have to do, I suppose, with the expected popular support. I don't think that the American people, in general, now is still willing to have a big war on their shoulders. And the Athenians, amazingly, did so not only under Cleon, but also under Cleophon several years later.
Yes.
When you think, well, everyone in his right mind would have terminated the Peloponnesian War, not so the Athenians. And apparently, Cleon and Cleophon knew this, that they could build on a amazing, but still there, kind of warlike mentality, which is not there for Trump to use in the US.
Yeah, I think that in one sense, Trump is accurately conveying kind of his supporters' feelings on this. I think that a lot of Americans in Trump's camp like the idea of big, strong, tough guy US swinging a stick and making people knuckle under to trade deals that's good for us and backing down in front of the sort of swagger that Trump has done. But absolutely right. Americans do not want to start a war, do not want to go fighting somewhere. And he's accurately reading that. So let's say it's both. He is accurately reading the mood of the Americans, and he's a money guy himself anyway. Athens, why Cleon saw correctly that the Athenians were the reverse, quite willing to fight and continue to fight. I suspect that the reason is the psychology was the war has been very difficult, but now we have the Spartans over a barrel. Now the Spartans are in real trouble, and we can defeat them once and for all. Because of course the Athenians hadn't just been in the war for the last 7 years with the Spartans. They had fought a previous war decades earlier. Everyone understood the long-term strategic opposition, tensions between Athens and Sparta. I think that Cleon was able to appeal to an Athenian sense. Now the Spartans are helpless. They're on the verge of a Helot rebellion. We have their prisoners. They can't invade us. They are just totally helpless. We can just punch them into submission, and the war will be over with a win. So we're not going to settle for a stupid peace treaty, which probably won't last very long anyway. And that's true. They made a peace treaty after Cleon died, and it didn't last very long anyway. I mean, the Athenians weren't totally wrong. I mean, they were still foolish not to seize whatever opportunity for peace, particularly later with Cleon. But he accurately read their thinking, and I think that was their thinking. I think it wasn't that the Athenians, were bloodthirsty people or something. I think they saw this was the chance to finally, once and for all.
I'm afraid I will strike a note of gloom because I am much less optimistic than you are on the Trump presidency and the possible re-election, because I want to point to another similarity between Cleon and Donald Trump. It is in Thucydides' famous phrasing, when he got lucky at Pylos, eutukesen. And this is the same thing that happened to Donald Trump. He was incredibly lucky, starting with the Republican primaries, when all the good candidates tore themselves apart, and with the choice of the Democratic candidate, I'm still persuaded that Bernie Sanders would have won against Trump.
Might have.
So
I didn't think
the two guys,
he might have.
the two are lucky guys. So, and here is my question for you. Since the problem with Cleon was that the opposition was not capable to come up with some good antagonist. After all.
Nicias was a political genius. I'm kidding. I take your point.
Well, Pericles had Cimon, and then after Thucydides, the son of Milesius. But this didn't happen with Cleon. So my question for you is, don't you think that maybe the Democrats made a huge mistake in putting so much weight in the Mueller investigation, the Russia connection, and in not the impeachment, which backfired in my opinion, and in not finding, in these 4 years almost, one respectable candidate?
Well, they didn't have the opportunity to find a candidate. I mean, just the way the American electoral system works, there is no way for the oppositional party to coalesce around an oppositional figure, unless the Speaker of the House happens to be some charismatic figure with a national following, which hasn't happened in my lifetime, and Nancy Pelosi is not that. So there was no way that the Democrats could have, in the last 3 years, presented a more united front. American politics doesn't work that way. Was impeachment and the Mueller investigation a mistake? I mean, the Mueller investigation but I think because of the very unpredictable way it turned out, the trick that William Barr pulled to completely eviscerate the results, knowing full well how Robert Mueller was going to behave on his side of things. But both the Mueller investigations and the impeachment, to a large extent, the Democrats felt they had no choice, not because of politics, but because they saw, maybe you could accuse them of hyperventilating, but they saw all the concerns that we're seeing, real national long-term threats to the Constitution and democracy. And that if they found egregious wrongdoing on Trump's behalf, as happened in Watergate, either the American people at large or the institutions of government would, work their way to justice. I think that it wasn't a political calculation, and the reason I'm pretty sure about this is because the Democrats, for months before they launched the impeachment investigation, could have launched an impeachment investigation. The Mueller report is full of damning evidence that could have convicted Trump of crimes just as egregious as the ones that forced Nixon to resign. But they held off because the political calculation was this wasn't going to work. And this is usually credited to Nancy Pelosi. There are people in the Democratic caucuses pushing her to start an impeachment investigation, get the committees in Congress to sort of finish Mueller's work, explore things that Mueller wasn't doing. And they did start to investigate, but they didn't call it impeachment. And there were, in the liberal media, like MSNBC, and there was lots of speculation. Maybe they should go for impeachment. They could get him, it went nowhere for months. There was no move to it at all. And what changed was the bombshell allegations from the whistleblower, and immediately followed up by hard evidence that Trump actually did that. And the initial reaction from Republicans that, well, if this is true, that's terrible, gave the Democrats the feeling that A, this is an egregious violation of the public trust, something that we really, just as public servants, can't let slide. And B, maybe the politics will turn, because Republicans, many of the Republicans initially said, well, this would be bad, but it's all hearsay and whatever. Unfortunately, the politics turned on them. I think it's just a matter of the rock solid support for Trump among Republicans forced the hand of forced the very wiggly spines of the Republicans in Congress to fall in line, and it was hopeless, whatever got revealed. But so I don't know that the Democrats could have played it a lot smarter. They're hemmed in by the way the political contests are set up in the U.S. And they were also hemmed in by their sense of duty as defenders of the Constitution to act when totally outrageous crimes were revealed. Politics be damned. And they hoped that politics would turn out well. About my optimism, so again, it's very near optimism, but the last polls I saw, maybe something's happened in the last couple of days since we've been at the conference and I haven't been looking. The last polls I saw showed that Trump is trailing in the polls every single major Democratic candidate right now. If you do head-to-head, Trump versus Sanders, Trump versus Warren, Trump versus Buttigieg, but he's losing against every single one of them. Even now, when he's got a national bump in the polls. The somewhat less optimistic thing about that is there's a small but noticeable lead against all of the opponents with just people responding to the poll in general. But among registered voters, the lead is tiny. It's like 1 to 2% with registered voters. And and now this is making any sort of election manipulation of the kind that we had in 2016. That sort of, and with the basic imbalance of the Electoral College as opposed to the popular vote, because of course the poll just tells us what the popular vote might be. It doesn't tell us what the Electoral College result would look like. It's too close for comfort, right? It's way too close for comfort. But that's my optimism, that at least in the popular polls, Trump is losing against all these people, and it's before they've had a chance to unite around anyone. When someone gets chosen, Sanders is looking good right now, but who knows who it's going to be at the end of the process. Whoever gets chosen, I'm confident the Democrats will unite around him, and there won't be the sort of ineffectual appearance they have now, attacking each other, and there are too many of them, and it's chaos. That'll all settle down. Of course, that means that the Trump attack machine will have one target instead of 8. And maybe make inroads. But anyway, so that's why I remain very barely a little bit optimistic.
Thank you, Professor. My question came in the same sense as Professor Riccarda. I come from a country where we have two presidents. We have a president in charge, and we have an interim president, and we have a real president or president at the presidential house. Last week, President Trump invited the president in charge to the State of the Union address and presented him as such. He said, I am here with the real president, which is the interim president. And this, as you were talking about the circumstances in Athens where they refused for peace because, well, now we have these Spartans finally ready after 30 years of war. It just resembles me that many people, or some Republicans at least in the States, can be thinking exactly the same about Cuba and Venezuela. I mean, finally we've got them under sanctions, we've got them ready. So at the same time, the optimistic side of thinking Trump to lose, in my very personal case, puts me in perspective of worriness. I mean, if November comes and, well, why don't we bump the guys? This
to sway the election, you mean? Late
yes,
October,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, month right. Before, something like that. I mean,
right.
Do you think, and then coming to the frame of populism, how likely is it for a populist, even in the US, to come up with this type of strategy, just speculating about it?
Yeah, I think I haven't seen that happen from American presidents in my time of being sort of politically observant. I mean, I don't think that sort of the two Iraq wars that the U.S. ginned up, the first one arguably provoked on the in the sense of coming to the aid of an ally, but certainly the second one unprovoked. I don't think either of those things happened because of calculations by the ruling party that you know, this would look good politically. Even though it is just common knowledge that war works, that, you know, at least in the short term, voters rally around the president, even if the president, you know, didn't get a declaration of war from Congress, which never happens anyway these days. Even if the president sort of ginned it up somehow. It certainly happened with the Iraq War, which turned out to be a classic case of, you know, ginning up a reason for war out of bogus information and playing it for everything it was worth. But I don't think that was about a calculation from George Bush that I need a bump in the polls, so I'm going to go do this. So it hasn't happened in my lifetime of paying attention to politics. So maybe that's why I'm optimistic it won't. But you know, but if I tell you, this is a really shaky optimism if I'm basing it on the fact that, well, this is a norm that Trump wouldn't break. I don't think that's not a reason to take. Trump will break any norm he wishes. If I'm going to take any confidence that he's not going to do that, it has to do with my previous answers about being a money guy, not a war guy, and the mood of the public as well.
Yeah, no, I just want to end. I understand people's kind of pessimism, but Eric, I share your optimism, and I want to say some kind of reason.
Glad there's one.
I know it is very depressing. One thing about discourse that is really troubling is after Trump leaves, it's going to be a permanent stain on the discourse. One piece of kind of optimism: Joseph McCarthy poisoned the political discourse in the early 1950s, and of course we know the Army McCarthy hearings. He was demolished by Joseph Welch, and he collapsed. And American political discourse recovered. That's not to say there have been other kind of problems. Secondly, I must say there's other things. Is that the American system is unusual because in most European countries, you have a professional civil service, and the highest members of the civil service which of course Dominic Cummings is calling the law, are actually professionals, and they are appointed. Whereas in the United States, ever since, for instance, going back to Jackson, we have this spoils system where the highest levels. But on the other hand, even actually with ambassadors, political appointment ambassadors in the United States is actually very, very few. Most of them are actually career diplomats. Even though he's really destroyed a lot of the morale actually in the State Department. But another thing, two things I think, is again, you mentioned we're all depressed, but the House of Representatives is in the hands of the Democratic Party under Nancy Pelosi. And it means that he hasn't got a complete takeover. What he can't do, and the thing is what he hasn't done, despite all this, he hasn't been able to publish, he's only got one major piece of legislation so far, and that was his tax cut. He tried to abolish Obamacare, but thanks.
That was when he had both houses of Congress.
Yes, exactly, absolutely, and yet he failed. Right, his legislative record, even when he had two houses of Congress, is pathetic. He's basically been doing all of this by executive orders. What's really worrying, though, is his kind of also is worrying is going at using executive orders to one, weaken Obamacare and also go into environmental regulations. That's worrying long term. But on the other hand, the other thing is also about the United States, which is very different from almost all other countries in the world. We have an extremely decentralized government. In other words, we have state governments which have their own budgets, which have their governors, and which also can do actually there's some states that are doing very good things despite what's going on in Washington. And I think I would just want to give you another reason for your optimism, and there I am with you.
All right, well, thank you. I think it all comes down to next November, because the institutional damage he's doing is relatively minor so far, but the process that you alluded to, and I did in a slightly different way in the talk, of the demoralization within agencies, suffering his media attacks and the political leaders he's putting at the top. The professionals, the skilled professionals, are bleeding away, and some of it is quite on purpose. We know it's on purpose. The whole move of the Department of Agriculture research agencies out of Washington was a naked ploy to cut staff without having to follow rules for cutting federal employees. That sort of thing has happened in a few cases, and it's been, in the State Department in particular, a loss of skilled professionals. But if he loses in November and another president takes over and starts restaffing people, I don't think that the damage is tremendous. But if there's 4 more years of it, I don't even know where. I don't think that.
Sorry, I had a maybe silly question. Is there any chance that he could be ostracized by his own party? Because it could be a threat, not only to America, but to the party itself. At some point, if he crosses too many lines. Because is he alone doing what he's doing? We're always presenting this person as acting on his own, but he's not on his own.
Right. So during Josina's talk, I was thinking, I never liked the idea of ostracism more than now. I used to talk about ostracism, in a vaguely positive way to undergraduate classes trying to explain how Athenian democracy works, and it's a mechanism of popular power and all. But but boy, it's never appealed to me more than now. But we have no mechanism for that. The only way Trump goes away is either impeachment, well that's failed, or what you're suggesting, which is a massive, sudden turning of their backs to Trump. I cannot imagine anything that Trump would do to cause that. Nothing. I don't think it's like Trump himself said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he would still support me. He would have to, sustain a major brain injury and just totally change up the way he acts around the people. I think that so Trump is a performer, we all know, and I think many people realize he is sort of a sham. He he doesn't know what he claims to know. He's not a good negotiator. He's not a very stable genius, either stable nor genius. He's none of these things. I think the American public, even a lot of the supporters, recognize this. When he's on stage doing his act, they know it's an act, but something about it they love. They want him to succeed. You know, they're going to a pep rally and they're cheering. And as long as that's their mindset, there's no one decision he could make, you know, to criticize the wrong Republican or something to cause any kind of a shift. It's going to have to be I can't imagine what would cause him to lose support. I will say this, and this occurred to me during the impeachment trials, and this wasn't my insight, it was some article I read, I can't remember from where. And it said this: if the Republicans, you know, against all expectations, the Republicans are going to go along with the Democrats and vote to convict him, it's not going to happen by cobbling together a few of the usual suspects, you know, Mitt Romney, who ultimately did make a very courageous vote and statement against, and Susan Collins, and all these sort of border characters. They're not going to negotiate, you know, sort of a moderate Democrat, moderate Republican, and just get barely enough votes. That's never going to happen. The way it's going to happen, if it happens, is the whole thing turns on a dime. That the Republicans en masse are going to decide we really have to get rid of him. I think for that to be politically realistic, the polls have to turn around completely among Republicans. And there's shooting people on Fifth Avenue remark, I don't think that's going to happen. I used to think that there was a revealed crime from Trump that would get the Republican senators to do that, but I don't know that there is a revealed crime that Trump but in the case, it doesn't matter because impeachment's over. The chance is passed. If Trump, maybe it's possible, if Trump had done even more violence to the Constitution in a very public, obvious way, Republicans could have, senators could have turned around. But the only way that was going to happen is if they all turn around at once, and that's only going to happen if Republican voter support for Trump plummets. And I don't think that's possible. I don't think there's anything he can do to cause that to happen. This is from the optimist.
Very good. We thank you once again for your wonderful talk.